What is up, my TBMS fans? It is Brian Mansell here, and today we've got a new YouTube video. We're going to be talking about Aaron Rodgers and what's going on with him in free agency and how he basically holds the future of the entire league in his hand. Now, before we get into that, if you guys like the video or like what you're seeing in content here, especially on Spotify with our podcast, The Brian Mansell Show 2.0 technically, that's on Spotify. If you guys like all that content, make sure you like and subscribe and follow all the socials you guys see in the scroll down below. But we have some trending news here. Rodgers is contemplating his future in the NFL, but 3 teams are waiting for him to make a decision. That's going to be the Steelers, the Giants, and the Vikings. All 3 teams waiting for Rodgers' decision. But I wouldn't say so much for Minnesota. So let me go into a little detail on that first, because this has just been a wild news cycle the last 2 weeks of free agency. So in short, there's been a huge QB turnover, and it all traces back to when the Seattle Seahawks traded Geno Smith to the Las Vegas Raiders. It created a domino effect that changed the direction of multiple players and which teams they would be going to. So now for guys like Aaron Rodgers, Russell Wilson, there's different options now on the table for them for a quarterback on where they should go. I mean, Justin Fields isn't even an option for the Steelers anymore because he signed with the Jets. So for right now, the Steelers are kind of handcuffed. The Giants are a little handcuffed. And the Vikings, they can get out of it whenever they want. So supposedly Aaron Rodgers has interest in becoming the Minnesota Vikings quarterback. But the question is, they have J.J. McCarthy. So what do they necessarily need Rodgers? And I think that's something internally Minnesota is talking about, if getting Aaron Rodgers makes the most sense. And this is something I talked about months ago. A few weeks into the season, I had said, well, if he's going to complete the Brett Favre cycle, he's got to go to Minnesota. And the fact that he's talking about going to Minnesota is ridiculous. But there's been other stories too. If the Vikings don't want him, he could ultimately retire. And that is why I said he's contemplating his NFL future. If the Vikings say, we're going to go in a different direction and roll with McCarthy, and Rodgers doesn't want to play for the Steelers or Giants, he's going to ultimately retire. So there's a domino effect here that affects a lot of different things. And I think we have to begin here talking about what goes on with Aaron Rodgers and, specifically his role with the Vikings first. The Vikings are the first team to discuss, because with the Vikings, do they necessarily need a guy like Rodgers? No, they could use McCarthy. McCarthy is coming off a severe injury he had last year that sidelined the whole year, hence why Sam Darnold had his resurgent year. He had his resurgent year, and now you have the need for a veteran to still be in the room, because McCarthy, this is basically his rookie year. So what's going to happen now? Do you go ahead and get the veteran who wants to start for a year or two? Or do you let McCarthy work on his own and develop and learn the hard way? Thrown into the fire like guys like Jaden Daniels and Drake May and even Caleb Williams were thrown into as rookies last year. Do we need the same thing in this situation? That's ultimately the question we have. And that's something that the Vikings have to figure out. Is Aaron Rodgers their answer? Is getting Aaron Rodgers going to solve that problem and help them become competitors once again next season? They were fantastic last year. Can they replicate it again? It all depends on what Kevin O'Connell and what the general manager for the Vikings want to do. Now, we're going to run through the 3 different factors here, the 3 different things. There is interest in him with the Giants. They want to give him an offer, make him the Giants quarterback. They do. But they also have interest in Russell Wilson and other backups. And then they also have the Steelers, who want a quarterback because now they've traded for DK Metcalf. So now he's with George Pickens. They've got an all-star offense. They just probably need another running back and to reform that O-line. But they just are a quarterback away from having a dangerous offense. And so they're looking at getting Wilson back or getting Rodgers. But if they can't get either one, what happens? That's why I'm saying there's so many things that happen that Aaron Rodgers has control over that teams don't understand. And I think the sooner we understand that, the better. And the best way to sum it up is, let's break it down into 4 different situations. If Aaron Rodgers does get the contract offer from the Vikings, what happens now with the Steelers and the Giants? Well, the Steelers would have to go fight for Russell Wilson to come back. And the Giants would have to go into war, in a bidding war, to get him back, to get him to New York. So now you have the Steelers and the Giants both fighting for Wilson. I think in a bidding war, the Giants could potentially lose. And let's say the Giants do lose the bidding war and the Steelers get him back. The Giants then have to go into the draft and draft a quarterback. Although they do have interest in guys like Jameis Winston potentially being a veteran option next year. That is true. And the only QB they have on roster right now is Tommy DeVito. And we all know that's not going to be their starter. We all know that. So it's more likely that if they miss out on Wilson and Rodgers, they're going to draft a quarterback, and his name is going to be Shedeur Sanders. Many teams have to contemplate different moves based off what they need as the most priority thing that they can fix short-term with free agency and what they need to fix long-term. So when they're weighing these options, some of them want to go quarterback now because it's going to be a long-term solution, even though it's only a short-term problem now, because they're going to lose their quarterback. So they'll go and grab one early. And that's going to become a thing this year as well. It happened last year with Atlanta. They grabbed Penix as an insurance policy for Kirk Cousins. And now look, Penix is the quarterback for Atlanta next year. See how that kind of shakes out? It's the same kind of deal. So for the Giants, it's looking like Shedeur Sanders is going to be probably the play here at that pick. But now what happens if the Giants win the bidding war and get Russell Wilson? If they win the bidding war, the Steelers are going to be in the need of quarterback. And they're not going to go with Jameis Winston. We all know that. Jameis Winston is not going to end up with the Steelers unless it's in a backup capacity. Which, if that were the case, that why'd bring back Mason Rudolph? Mason Rudolph is the backup option now. So, now they're going to be in play for quarterback. Does Shedeur slide down the board, or does somebody else become available that they can take late in the first? Jackson Dart's going to be the guy that we have to worry about in all of this, because Jackson Dart, he's got every intangible to be a great quarterback in this league. He's probably one of the most prolific throwers, as you can see with the combine work here. He is clearly one of the most athletically gifted and talented quarterbacks among every prospect in this class. The only thing he doesn't have is the natural speed to be a proper dual threat quarterback, but you do have to worry about him if he rolls out. He's got perfect pocket mobility. It's just he's got an excellent arm. He's got excellent power. He just got to work on his touch a little bit, but otherwise he is perfectly fine to be a starter in this league. And if Pittsburgh's really desperate, they will trade up to get a quarterback if they want Shedeur. But if Jackson Dart's right there, who's just as good, who they think could still be a great starter, why would they need to go trade up for a Shedeur Sanders? That's the thing that I'm trying to understand and process with Pittsburgh. If you don't get Wilson or Rodgers, where do you go from here? There's not many options available for you at that point. So now we got to look at this from another perspective too. Let's say Rodgers chooses Pittsburgh. Minnesota is not going to go after Wilson, which means the Giants have the open door for Wilson unless the Titans make a heavy offer and they decide they want to get him to be their starter next year. Personally, I think that would be not the smartest move and by Tennessee standards, but it's still something in play. We've still heard that the Titans were interested. We haven't heard anything else on that front. So there's still a quiet little team that could go ahead and steal him and pull him away and make him their quarterback. So that's something else to think about. So let's say Wilson goes to the Giants, right? The Steelers get Rodgers. The Giants have Wilson. And now the Vikings don't get either of the two. They have J.J. McCarthy. Are they going to roll with just J.J.? No, they'll get a backup. And when they get their backup will likely be somebody along the lines of a Jameis Winston type. Or they'll go in the draft and they'll grab somebody later. So maybe possibly a Jalen Milroe they could grab. But he's more probably going to be a second or third pick. If not him, they could be looking at a Seth Hennigan from Memphis. They could be looking at Brady Cook from Mizzou, who's been getting more attention as possibly a 6th-round pick now. A Dylan Gabriel. There's many ways that the Vikings could go to get themselves an insurance policy behind McCarthy. And, I mean, possibilities are endless there. So, for the Vikings, it's not much of an urgency. It's kind of like, do we really need Rodgers or not? If we don't need Rodgers, we'll just stick with McCarthy and go grab a backup or draft one in the mid-rounds. So Minnesota's almost a non-factor here. Just if they pull Rodgers, everything else falls apart. Now, let's say Rodgers chooses New York. He chooses to go to the Giants. Where does that leave Russell Wilson now? Well, I think there's only one place Russell Wilson could go at that point. And it's the only place I think he has found success in his later years now, ever since he left Seattle. And for me, that place would be where he was last season in Pittsburgh. Going back to the Pittsburgh Steelers makes the most sense for Russell Wilson. I don't see him really becoming a Tennessee Titans quarterback, and I'm sure Titans fans really aren't welcoming the idea of him being their quarterback. So for Russell Wilson, he could end up being a Steeler here. And that's kind of not going back to the Steelers. And I don't know if the Steelers fans are ready for that, but I don't think they're against the idea necessarily. They're kind of exploring everything. I think what they don't want is Rodgers. So there's this weird thing going on. Rodgers is supposedly not what the Steelers fans want. The Giants fans are like, I guess we could roll with Rodgers, but we really wanted Shador. And then you also have the Vikings fans who are like, but why? Why do we need Rodgers? And honestly, I think Minnesota makes the most sense for Rodgers, and that'll be a whole other story I'll have for the podcast tomorrow. But the whole trickle-down effect from these moves is ridiculous. So if, let's say, Wilson does end up back with the Steelers, Rodgers goes to the Giants, the Vikings, same situation. You got to get a backup or go draft somebody in the mid-rounds. But that means a QB-needy team could be moving up as well, who didn't really have a need before, but now noticing that teams are filling their spots, they're realizing maybe we can convince them that we need the pick more than them, and that we can go grab the quarterback and they can have what they want from us. And kind of make a steal because the quality of quarterback they're going to be taking is going to be excellent, and it takes them away from a potential competitor down the line. So there's another way to look at it that way in terms of draft. But overall, there's just the complexity all lands with Rodgers. And we're not even taking into account the most wild possibility. Aaron Rodgers could retire. And if he chooses retirement because Minnesota doesn't give him the contract that he wants, and he doesn't sign with them, Minnesota, again, they're kind of a non-factor here. They can have Rodgers. They cannot have Rodgers. That's fine for them because they have J.J. McCarthy. But for a team like the Giants, now they got to go into this bidding war for Russell Wilson with Pittsburgh. They did a bidding war to go after Stafford. That's been well reported. They were going to give him a lot of money. But now they're going to be out there. Now they're going to be out on that because they missed out on Stafford because he wanted to stay in L.A. Now you got to spend to get Wilson. You can't overspend either. So there's this weird kind of line that this team's got to follow. And then you've got Pittsburgh, who needs a quarterback desperately. So the two of them are going to bid up into a point. There's going to be a cap, and then somebody's going to win here. And it goes back to what I proposed when I first talked about the idea that Rodgers chooses the Vikings. It's going to be the same situation. If Pittsburgh wins the war, the Giants have to draft a quarterback. If the Giants win the war, the Steelers got to find a way to get a quality quarterback to get a winning record again next season and be a better team and bigger competitor in the North. So either way, somebody's getting the short end of the stick, and the Giants are in better position actually to survive this ordeal. If they don't get Rodgers, it's not the end of the world. They don't get Wilson, it's not the end of the world. But you got to go get a rookie quarterback at that point, and it's going to be Shador Sanders because the Titans or Browns are going to be locked in at Cam Ward at number 1 or 2. So I don't think he makes out of the top 2. So you got to reach for Shador, trade back, get Jackson Dart, whatever they want to do. They have to keep in with the mindset that they need a new quarterback desperately. And this offense needs to figure something out because Dable and Shane don't have much more time. Okay, they got an extension from ownership from Mara for another season. But if they can't show results showing that they're building a stronger future for the team with sustained success, they will be out of a job just as fast. Because knowing Mara is very patient up to a point. And I think his patience is running thin. So with that, the Giants have to be very careful here, but they have more control than they're showing. And Rodgers' decision here affects a few different teams. So really, Rodgers holds in his hand the crystal ball to determine who goes where. In the end, that's really all he wanted. We all talked about him not doing well with the Jets last year, even though stats say otherwise. But in the end, he still has full control just like he did in his prime, where he was running the NFC. He's got full control over what direction each of these three teams go for next season. Aaron Rodgers, who's over the age of 40 now. Unbelievable. Thank you guys so much for watching. If you guys like this kind of content, make sure you like and subscribe and keep your eyes out and turn notifications on for any new videos coming in the future. We also have a podcast, The Brian Mansell Show, on Spotify. You guys can check those out Mondays, Wednesdays, and Fridays. Until then, we'll see you next time.